Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You were joining your host Greg Tompsett and my comfortable lounging partner in crime out in the wonderful Western New York afternoon. Aaron Quinn, how we doing?
It's gorgeous out here in the
Yeah.
Buffalo area, and I am lounging. My feet are up. I couldn't be living any freer, man. What a fun afternoon of football, even if it was just a half of a lot of fun. And excited to get an extra round in with you, man.
Yeah. I figured that was too fun of a start not to come talk about it. We're not going to do a full in-depth deep dive like we normally do, but we're going to have a little bit of fun. That was too exciting to see them go 3-and-out touchdown, 3-and-out touchdown, turnover, touchdown, 3-and-out touchdown.
Yeah.
And the 28-0 shellacking while the starters were in there to go through. So certainly an exciting start. We'll talk through a couple quick takeaways, but just wanted to come in and be able to say hello to all of Bills Mafia and the people that enjoyed the game today. But just off the top of your head, what were some of the names that flashed for you or guys that you were impressed by today?
Obviously, the Mitch Trubisky revenge game will be the
Yeah.
big narrative of this one. And I was a little frustrated in how the media was building that up. And now that he had his revenge, I'm all for this narrative for the rest of the week. So that's a lot of fun. Outside of that, it was I liked seeing Gabe Davis get involved in the offense early. We talked about that on the podcast here this week, that I wanted to see him get some touches because he's that fourth wide receiver of this team, and I want to see him kind of get going and get productive when nobody else is in. We saw that. Hollister was a guy that showed some flashes today, what he can add to the offense. I want to go back and watch some of him. McKenzie, obviously he had the muff punt, which is super concerning, and we're going to have to talk about it on the show, but had a lot more
Everything
positives.
else is great.
Yeah, a lot more positives in this game and things that I wanted to see from him, which is more of a traditional wide receiver role. We saw him in a slot role, finding spots in the defense, consistent with his hands, getting some yards after the catch, all things I want to see from him. So interesting game all around. I'm sure there's more guys we could talk about, but how about you?
Yeah.
Who are some names that you saw?
Yeah, you touched on several that I was excited about. Love to see the way Davis used his body and positioning on some of those slants. We hadn't seen him, use the fact that he's the biggest receiver as a benefit. So I was excited to see that. The young defensive line, again, just ridiculous. The best game I've ever seen from AJ Epinesa in a Bills uniform. Constant pressure, just bullied. The one was, he straight up embarrassed the starting left tackle of the Chicago Bears and buried him on a sack. Greg Rousseau with another pressure and then a sack. The pressures in this game were fantastic, and then it kept coming. You kept seeing more and more waves of it. A couple concerning things we'll get to from an injury standpoint. I'm really curious. I think 5 or 6 guys showed up on the injury report at one point. So, I heard Harrison Phillips getting checked on with his knee. Justin Zimmer at one point looked in some pretty serious discomfort, but then went back in the game. So obviously thinking he's okay. Marquez Stevenson has a punt return for a touchdown. Looks amazing with his speed there. Then on coming up on an ensuing kickoff, looks like he tweaked his foot or ankle. They showed the x-rays came back negative. But he was still in a walking boot, wasn't on crutches, so I think that's a shorter term thing, but probably puts a chance at the active roster in jeopardy. We'll see where that goes. Tommy Doyle and Spencer Brown both out with some injuries, so some things that I want to hold my breath here because number one in preseason, no injuries. You don't want to see anything like that. But one other name that flashed for me that we didn't talk about a ton.
My kid's popping into the show here for you.
He's got to make his debut. So does Reggie Gilliam have a shot at this roster? Like 4 short yardage carries. I assume that's Zach Moss's role, but they gave him 2 fourth downs and 2 short yardage ones, and he converted 2 for first downs and 2 for touchdowns. He looked kind of good.
Yeah, I think he does have a shot at this roster. There's going to be some numbers games, and we were talking offline a little bit. I have not still, at this point, maybe it's because I'm a lazy content maker here, but I have not gotten into roster projections yet. I probably will start to over the next week here. So I don't know where numbers are going to fall across the rest of the roster. It will be tight. I can guarantee you that. We saw people talking about keeping 7 wide receivers today because of the depth there. We've heard, obviously there's a good argument, depending on the health of Harrison Phillips, there's a good argument to keep an 11 defensive linemen. And obviously you want to have a good amount of numbers, even though maybe the talent isn't there at offensive line. You want to have a decent amount of bodies at offensive line going into the season. So numbers are going to get a little fuzzy, but I think that he's got a role in this offense. We know from years of arguing people of DeMarco in this offense, how much Brian Daboll would like to have a fullback in the offense to provide some looks and get defenses out of looks and into looks specifically for him. So I think they'd like to keep Gilliam here, and I think he's definitely proving some value here in this preseason. So definitely a name to keep an eye out for. And fantasy-wise, man, what was it? 3 touches, 2 touchdowns? Like, you're the fantasy guy. You got to get that guy.
Anyone playing preseason fantasy, I have a helpline I can give you.
You're a degenerate.
You have some concerns. And honestly, the name that's going to come into play weirdly with Gilliam is, in my mind, going to be Taiwan Jones. In that, do they think Gilliam can provide special teams ability, not directly as a gunner, but if you counterbalance that with, hey, Kumaro and Saran Neal can be the gunners, and Gilliam can soak up special team snaps, but also provide some H-back, some fullback, some movable tight end pieces. Then we only need 3 tight ends because we have Gilliam, and they normally like 4 tight ends. I think that the idea of Reggie Gilliam versus Taiwan Jones could maybe be a thing here over these next 2 weeks until we see the cut down.
Yeah, this is one of the things I'm most interested to see is they've put so much emphasis on these special teams aces and these special teams primarily players. Sarah Neal, that's going to be primarily his role, right? Kumro, while we like what he's flashed as a wide receiver, if he makes this team, most of his snaps are coming special teams. Andre Smith, another guy that's flashing as a linebacker here in the preseason, but when it comes to the season, he's primarily going to be a special teams player. So how many of these guys, Tyler Manikevich, how many of these guys are you going to lock up roster spots for when there is guys that could be hybrid productive players that are going to see the field in 2021? I'm not sure. So this is going to be an interesting thing that really is going to come down to the final cut down day. We won't get an answer till August 31st. We won't have that answer until then. So definitely a battle to watch. I don't think any one of these guys, especially a Taiwan Jones, even though Brandon Beane has said he's, an elite gunner and all these things, I don't necessarily know that that's a lock, right? They're going to say those things in positive, and they are good at special teams, and they're going to talk about that in the media, but that doesn't necessarily equate to that person's a lock because they've got to put this roster together to play games this season, and it's a marathon season. So if you have a guy that has some more versatility and can provide something else, it might push one of these guys off the roster.
Yeah, and we got a question here asking about did we see Deion Dawkins reps? I made a comment earlier about how you love to see domination at the line of scrimmage. The Bills were dominating on both sides of it, so we already talked about the defensive line looking great across the board of just about everybody. There was maybe a couple times late where they lost contain. The offensive line looked really good early. Deion Dawkins was in for 2 series that I counted. I thought it was the second series as well. Moved well, had 1 rep I saw in pass blocking where he went inside to help the guard and then saw a corner blitz and moved his feet back really well, picked up the blitz coming off the edge. So looked to be in pretty solid form. Obviously, we'll need to go back and watch a little more closely how we looked in some of those reps. Cody Ford had a great game. They ran right behind him every time they had short yardage, and he blew out his guys. Looked very, very good there. Spencer Brown looked really good. Obviously concerning. He left with a knee injury. We'll have to see how serious that was. But he looked good. Like, this was better than last week, where last week was one-sided, and it was obviously the good run blocking, but questionable pass blocking. He looked good in pass blocking today, right? He looked more comfortable on the right side, in my opinion. So I thought the offensive line looked good. Absolute palms here. We appreciate you very, very much. Asking, our D-line looked good without Addison, Hughes, and Starr. That is a great sign. 2
games in a row.
Yeah, and the one I want to bring up that, it's kind of hard to have takeaways from late in the game in a preseason game because, it's a lot of questionable guys on both sides. It's hard to know who's really benefiting whom and who's giving up easy plays. I kind of thought it was interesting that Vernon Butler didn't go in until really late and then was playing late into the fourth quarter. Justin Zimmer or Harrison Phillips started. Zimmer got all the next set of reps. Man, that is interesting that Vernon Butler was in that late. And, we saw the research that I dug through with everybody to see that there actually is some cap savings. If they release him, they can save 1.7, 1.8 million. Man, after seeing that today, I have to now assume that he's on the outside looking in as of today.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I'm on team keep 11 defensive linemen, and I've not once thought of Vernon Butler being in that group of guys I'd like to keep. Part of the problem for him right now, I think, is like you said, he was sorted to the end of the depth chart of defensive tackles, but they're also looking at a lot of these looks of the 4 defensive ends, with Abada playing inside and stuff like that. So that's going to take reps away from these guys that are at the bottom of the depth chart when they're looking for looks like that. But yeah, not a great sign for Butler that he's playing at the very end of a game where your starters weren't even playing, right? Like the Bills were already into their third team guys into the second quarter. So for you not to be getting out there into the fourth quarter, that's probably not a great sign that you're going to be a part of this team going forward. He'd probably big upward battle. Maybe if some of these injuries get substantial, something with Harrison Phillips, and who knows if Zimmer, that's a worse injury than you think, then maybe, because it does thin out quick. And I think Rob Quinn brought that up, and a couple other guys said, hey, if some of these injuries are serious, then this thins out real quick. And now this team's looking for defensive linemen where we thought we had a surplus of defensive linemen going into the game. So that's how quickly the NFL can kind of change on you. But yeah, I can't see a path right now for him, especially if they're trying to kick the Boogie Basham and Obata inside. Yeah. There's just no reps left.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see that. And as you start to count, obviously you have some of the automatic, you have Addison and Hughes, you have Oliver and Starr, then you have Epinesa and Rousseau, then you have Basham. Then it gets to, if you have Phillips and Zimmer, that's 9. Daryl Johnson's 10. Is Vernon Butler an 11th guy, or does that now all of a sudden give you a 7th wide receiver or a 6th linebacker? Because Terrell Dodson, Terrell Adams, and Andre Smith are all looking pretty decent. Maybe they want to keep 6 linebackers. People asked us about Nick McLeod, who we had, draft time. Damon Talbot was on and talked about the his kind of off the radar guy was Nick McLeod. He's looked okay. Are they going to look to try to find a way to keep a 6th cornerback? We have the battle with Josh Thomas and Jaquan Johnson and DeMar Hamlin. Do they want to keep a 5th safety? If you pick any one of those, you can't have 11 defensive linemen. You're going to have to cut some corners somewhere. So, whether that comes, an IR spot from one of the guys from today, hopefully not, but maybe some depth gets, a little questionable at one of those places. I'm really curious to see where those come in.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. And it's not just on the defensive side of the ball, right? Like when you're building this roster, if they say Stevenson is healthy to go and they want to keep him on the roster and you're keeping 7 wideouts, that is going to take away from the possibility of that 11th lineman or somewhere. You're going to have to lighten up somewhere where you otherwise wouldn't. So it's going to be real interesting to see. This is why it's so hard to do projections, and I'm seeing all these constant projections and injuries, gameplay, all this changes so much that I'm going to wait a little bit for mine because we got to see how this shakes out. We still got another whole week here with another game to see how it shakes out. But Brandon Beane's going to have some tough decisions. Every time Josh Allen's gotten interviewed, hey, what are you watching? He said, hey, this team's stacked. And you're seeing that play out. That's what you saw here today against the Chicago Bears was a really good team with way better depth than the team they were going against, we had no of the major stars on this team on either side of the ball playing, and they were still dominating.
Were sitting out.
Yeah.
15 starters were sitting out, and it was 28-0.
Yeah, and so you have 15 guys that are roster locks, and then you still are running out there. And like I said, into the second quarter, you were seeing guys that during the season will be considered third team or special teams only, still dominating some of the first team and second team guys of another NFL professional team. So a lot of hard decisions for Brandon Beane and staff to make. I can't wait to see it. I think even there's going to be a lot of good guys on the practice squad for this team this year, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, and that's, Alan here standing for Nick McLeod. I respect it. He's still a priority practice squad guy for me. He hasn't worked his way into my 53-man roster, but I am excited for the fact that, maybe there's another Levi Wallace type UDFA good story. Those are always great to see and develop. I think he's still behind both Levi Wallace and Dane Jackson. They have Taron Johnson. Obviously, Saran Neal's always tough. The 73-yard touchdown, he had pretty good coverage. Like I would have loved to see him get his head around it and knock away the ball, but he was right there. It literally got plucked off of his helmet as he was going for it. So I don't fault that. But I also don't want to see Saran Neal playing cornerback either. I want him as a special teamer, as an depth guy.
I'll look like a stan and an idiot, and people come at me. I'm gonna defend that one real quick here. It was bad coverage from the start. He made up for it because he has good athleticism, but he had great coverage at the end of that. And for anyone with the, just turn your head around, yes, you want to see that out of a guy, but that's a lot easier said than done in that situation when you're playing catch up. It's a split second. We also were praising Wild Goose for making the same play and not turning his head around, but the ball was incomplete. So we can't have it both ways. I thought it was actually good coverage for Neal, and sometimes it's the NFL. The other guy wins a rep. Yeah. And so good on the Bears. Well, I don't even remember the guy's name. Great rep from him. It looks really bad for Neal, but I think when we go back and watch, I think Neal had a number of good reps in this game compared to what we saw in the Lions game. He had much more favorable matchups in the slot early on. He wasn't going up against real shifty guys. There was one of the sacks early on, I think on the third down on the first series, was a really good coverage, and Neal was part of that. I think they wanted to go in his direction. He had good coverage there. So again, this isn't a guy that I want to see a lot of reps from during the year. If something goes wrong, Taron Johnson gets hurt and he's in there playing slot. But I think he's got a defined role on the defense. We saw it against the Chiefs. I think bigger tight ends in the nickel, he could come out and guard where you don't have Taron Johnson maybe getting bullied by some of those big guys.
Against the Patriots when you have two tight ends on the field.
Absolutely, yeah. But his special teams ability alone makes him a roster lock no matter what. And the fact that he can maybe be your fourth or fifth defensive back. He has some experience playing safety, I guess, in the case of emergency. And the fact that they kind of use him inside and out since he's been here has a little bit of versatility. And again, we don't want to see it, but that versatility does matter, I think, to Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane.
Sure. Richard here asking, we'll do this, one of our last questions. Do I think Stevenson jumped McKenzie today for both return jobs? I'll stop short of saying jump, but it's naive to think that a muff by McKenzie and a punt return touchdown by Marquez Stevenson means nothing. I mean, Stevenson looked great and was fast. The rest of the game, I thought McKenzie looked really good. So obviously it's very frustrating. Your biggest fear with transitioning from Andre Roberts to Isaiah McKenzie is ball security. Early in his career, McKenzie had issues fielding punts and muffing the punt. So it wasn't great. He bounced back with a 36-yard return and then 7 catches for 72 yards and a jet sweep as well, including like 5 on one drive right after the muff that they, I think, wanted to kind of reassure him and get his confidence back. So I still think McKenzie's firmly on the roster. And then obviously Stevenson's foot injury throws a wrench into any of that. But I will still say, I think Stevenson is the long-term developmental return guy for this roster. I just don't know if it's 2021.
Yeah.
What does Oliver think?
Yeah, I don't know what my kid thinks. He's wondering why I'm not back inside yet. Yeah, this one's going to be one that I think is tough because I get super frustrated. I was so mad when McKenzie fumbled that ball, but he's been so consistent in all the other aspects of the game this year, and that's where I wanted to see his development was as a more of a wide receiver, not just a gadget guy. And I want to see consistency. You know that we've talked about that for years. You know me, Greg. I don't want to talk about special teams and fumbles and things like that. I'd rather have somebody, a Micah Hyde type, that just is catching it versus big splash plays. I just want consistency. I don't want turnovers. But he did have a good return, and Stevenson wasn't perfect either. He had a drop as a wide receiver, and they're not using him in that Isaiah McKenzie way as a wide receiver. So I don't know that I agree with you. I think 2021, it's going to be McKenzie's job. And Rob Quinn brought it up that while we don't want to see anyone get hurt, and we're not wishing injury or long for anybody else, the Stevenson injury might be an opportunity and a sort of a blessing in disguise to stash him on the IR this year. And I don't want to get into, speculating any of that, but this could end up being a chance to stash that guy versus having to use the 7th wide receiver spot to make sure that other team doesn't take him. Because I do think that type of speed even though he's a late round pick and teams weren't clamoring for him in the draft, when you see that speed translate, and yeah, the special teams, they did a good job blocking up that punt return, but he legitimately outranked guys and guys that had good angles on him, and he still outran them. Teams are going to see that speed on tape, and they'll find a way to get him off waivers if he goes through waivers. So this might be an opportunity to do an IR stash with Stevenson and kind of have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, no, I think, just like you said, how they handled Isaiah Hodgins last year.
Right.
It's just another opportunity to be able to go through there. We'll see. Honestly, I wouldn't be heartbroken if Tommy Doyle was able to be stashed.
Yeah.
He left the game with a knee injury. He was going to be very likely game day inactive all season. I will say the concern with the tackle play from last week, I think, was better. So he who shall not be named wasn't embarrassing today. You advise people to pump the brakes on, hey, Bobby Hart didn't have to be cut that day. You still need, large humans to stand there for these third and fourth quarters of these preseason games. And he acquitted himself reasonably today. He did not embarrass himself today. He was fine. I don't think he has any path to this roster. I also don't expect him to be one of the 5 cuts coming up here, especially with Doyle and Spencer Brown injured.
Yeah.
I actually won't be shocked if they bring in another offensive tackle just to have some options in depth. And I know we talked about that before. If either of those injuries are anything more than 1 to 2 weeks here, or something very, very minor, we have to sign someone. We absolutely would need to bring someone in, or
just for the rest of camp, you need bodies and reps for camp.
Yeah. So curious to see where that goes. Obviously, I don't think we have anyone else who can step in there. I don't want Ryan Bates bumping back out to tackle. I don't want obviously I don't want Bobby Hart on this roster. I don't want any of those other guys that we've had kicking out there. Jordan Debbie's looked terrible at guard. Jameel Douglas had a really poor snap to Davis Webb. So the later depth has been questionable. I'd love to see Forrest Lamp get into a game at some point here, or practice. Do we have anything there? He hasn't even been able to get on the field. So tackle is a spot I could see them maybe kicking the tires on somebody coming in, and then we'll see where the other pieces go. And any final thoughts for the fans?
Yeah, I do have a final thought, because that's a good place to kind of talk about, because I had some Sierra Neal haters telling me how much garbage he was, in my mentions. And again, I think we have to try to step away as Bills fans. I hyper focus on the Bills all the time. And this was a pet peeve I talked about on the Bruce Nolan exclusive podcast here when we're talking about pet peeves, was we tend to hyper focus on our roster and want it to be perfect. But if you look league wide and you look around at 4th, 5th cornerbacks or 4th, 5th offensive linemen and tackles, like the Bills roster is still on par with any other roster in the NFL, or better in those terms. So yeah, I'd put Sierra Neal up with almost any 4th, 5th cornerback, especially when you add in his special teams ability. And these linemen that we're talking about, well, obviously neither one of us want to see these guys play, but the NFL isn't littered with super deep lines. Once you get out of starters, there's a lot of teams that can't even field the whole starting unit. So we have to have a little bit of perspective of where our team stacks up against other teams in the league, especially when it comes to things like these depth pieces. And none of them are going to be perfect. They're all going to be flawed, and none of us want to see any of them get significant amount of run. But this is the NFL, and this is why there's so much parity in the league. And it's hard to be consistently good and win consistently, because injuries happen and these depth pieces have to play. So they're going to be flawed, but I think the Bills are in a good spot pretty much throughout the roster.
Appreciate Carl and your thoughts here, and especially I agree with many of the names here. I'll kind of end on that. My final thoughts were, I'm super glad that we saw another dominant game from the young defensive line all the way through, but most especially AJ Epinesa. I thought he had his consistently best game. I was glad to see another game from Rousseau. Ed Oliver collapsed the pocket on the one of the early sacks. I was really happy to see those things. But if we have something with both Rousseau and AJ Epinesa for the future moving forward, that is a huge piece to have those guys on rookie contracts and to be able to build that going forward. So that was my biggest takeaway for today.
Peter Schrager had him as a breakout player this year on Good Morning Football, and he's looking pretty good so far this preseason as a breakout guy. And if this defense finished strong, and I think Tremaine Edmonds, who we haven't seen yet this preseason, will take a big step forward this year. And if he not that all of them are going to, but if like the three, Edmonds, Epinesa, and Ed Oliver, even if 2 out of 3 of those guys take a big step forward, that's a massive transition for this defense going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Carl, appreciate it again with the not impressed. I'm still on the boat that we don't have a tight end one on the roster. Dawson Knox dropped another pass.
That drops tough, yeah.
It's it's not the end of the world. It's fine. Our passing game's still going to be fine, but he
had a couple
Jacob
nice
Hollister
catches
looked
too,
pretty
yeah.
good, and he always does.
Good. Yeah,
Knox always has impressive contested catches. It's just the consistency. So we'll see where those things go. But appreciate everybody's engagement tonight. Just a quick little recap of the game. Love everybody jumping on. But appreciate it. Make sure you guys check us out. We're going to have shows every single night of the week for you guys. We have, the new show with Kyle and Rob on Monday nights. It's been going great. Yep. The Hoof on Tuesdays. Aaron and I will be there for you every Wednesday night doing our previews. Thursday night with Disguised Coverage with Anthony Prohaska. The new fantasy show on a lot of Friday nights. We've been bumping to Sunday, doing some kind of late takeaways from the preseason games of this week. And then as the season gets rolling, Aaron and I will be here with you with post-game shows after each game. So, really had a lot of fun tonight. You can find Aaron Quinn on Twitter at AaronQuinn716. You can find me at Greg Tompsett. Having a good time. Give us a like, give us a rating, give us a review. We're actually going to be giving away 2 tickets to the Packers preseason game next week based on review here this weekend. So last chance to be able to get any of those in. We're going to be picking a winner here, I think, tomorrow night. So give us a quick review there, and we'll be able to have some fun and come and watch the Bills. Your first chance to tailgate here in Buffalo in quite a while. So
and I'll see you next week in real life.
Yes, very excited to be able to go and enjoy the game myself. Any final thoughts for the people?
Nah, man, enjoy the rest of your weekend. This weather. If you're in Western New York, get outside. We've been stuck inside because of the great game all day. Get out there and enjoy the sunshine, man.
Absolutely. It's exactly what I'm going to do right now. So everybody, hope you had a great day. Enjoy a fun Buffalo Bills win. On behalf of Aaron Quinn, I am Greg Tompsett. You have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.